Welcome to the webinar series for National Archaeology Week 2026. We'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and First Peoples community of Australia, where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have lived and practiced their culture for many thousands of years. We pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants, who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. National Archaeology Week is a celebration of all things archaeology and cultural heritage in Australia from all time periods, and also the work that archaeologists in Australia do. We're very lucky to have our first webinar today, presented by anthropologist and archaeologist and professor Liam Brady from Flinders University, who is Director of the Australian Research Council Training Centre for Archaeology in the Resources Sector. And I'd like to pass over to Liam. Thank you, Liam.
Thanks, Caroline, and thanks for the invitation to come and present to everybody today. I'm really looking forward to this. I just want to begin by saying that I'm coming to you from beautiful Kaurna country, and I just want to begin by saying Nadlutapinthi Kaurna Minyarta Yarta Mathanya Wama Tartanyaku, which means that we recognize that Kaurna people are the landowners and the custodians of the Adelaide Plains, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So today I'm here to talk about the Australian Research Council Training Centre for Archaeology in the Resources Sector. And it's been a fun time. It's been a challenge over the last few months to be able to get things up and going, but we're really excited by the next steps. So I just want to be able to take you through the presentation, talking about how we actually got to this point, what's the background, what's the aims, the goals, and what the hopefully the outcomes are going to be, and also to talk about the partner organizations that have come on board for this. But I thought I would just give a bit of a background as to who I am. And so I've been an archaeologist since 2002. I'm originally from Canada. I came over here to do my PhD. And one of the first places that I went when I was doing my research was to the beautiful Torres Strait Islands. Who doesn't like doing work on remote tropical islands? It was quite stunning up there. And I was at Monash University. I was supervised by Ian McNiven and Bruno David. And I spent a lot of my time doing surveys across the islands with Torres Strait Islander families and just learning about how people related to the sea and to land, and recording a lot of rock art and doing some excavations as well. So it's been quite a great time there working in Torres Strait. So right now I'm based at Flinders University. I do a lot of research and teaching. I do a lot of training of future archaeologists as well. Before that, I was at Monash University, where I was in the Monash Indigenous Studies Centre and doing a lot of lecturing and teaching. But like I said, one of the first projects I did in Australia was in the Torres Strait Islands. After that, I moved to Western Australia. I took up a job at the University of Western Australia in the Archaeology department, and it was a postdoctoral research fellow. So that means I got to be able to do a lot of research, and I ended up working in the Pilbara. And this is with the Balgu families, who are the traditional owners of Balgu country, which is about 150 kilometers southeast of Port Hedland, down around near Nullagine. And I was invited to come out and do some rock art recording with Balgu families and with the rangers around some threatened sites, did some work into a National Heritage Listing project, and really just kind of got an understanding of the challenges that traditional owners are facing in the Pilbara. This is the Pilbara is the economic powerhouse of Australia, where you've got mines galore, you've got railways, haul roads, and so much industrial activity through the mining sphere that it's, where does cultural heritage fit into the day-to-day lives of people? And then where does cultural heritage, how is it managed by traditional owners and also by mining companies? So that was my real sort of introduction to that area between cultural heritage management and traditional owners and mining companies. So after that, I moved into, I still work in the Pilbara, but after that, I moved into the Southwest Gulf of Carpentaria. I was invited by the Leantha Sea Rangers to work with Yanyua families. on the Pelu Islands just outside of Borroloola. So it's about 1,000 kilometers southeast of Darwin, just close to the Queensland border. So there, I was working with a lot of with the ranger groups to be able to go out and record a huge number of rock art sites, travel across the sea in dinghies, and just yeah, really getting an understanding for how people engaged with sea country. And there was a lot of learning on my part to yeah, to really understand the complexity of Yanua understandings of archaeology, of the rock art sites that we were recording. We did a lot of writing together as well. We actually published a book on Yanua rock art called Jacarawuka, Too Many Stories, Narratives of Rock Art from Yanua Country. And that was a lot of fun for me to be able to work with so closely with Yanua families. One of the other things that really sort of got my attention when I was working in the Gulf country was the MacArthur River Mine is located close by, and its port facilities are on Yanua country. And again, it was just really interesting to see how people, how traditional owners responded to the MacArthur River Mine being impacting their cultural heritage sites, and the ongoing negotiation conversations that were going on, and just really sort of listening to people talk about how damaging it has been that these sites have been impacted over time, not just the land but also in the sea as well. So again, that sort of thinking has really sort of framed how this training center, the ideas of the training center have really emerged. But I will say, because it is National Archaeology Week, just to talk about the way that I've always done archaeology. So, working with traditional owners across Northern Australia, my work has always been framed as part of as being partnership-based research. So, working with traditional owners and working with, by, and for traditional owners. I go out onto country. I fully recognize that I am a guest on traditional owner lands, and the traditional owners are the hosts. And so, therefore, they own these projects. They control them. Power rests with them. And yeah, I'm very much a visitor and able to work closely with people to help meet their aims, their agendas. And it's always a bottom-up approach. I like to be able to come in and sit down with people and talk about what they're interested in doing, and building a research project up from that from that foundation, I guess, is probably the best way to put it. So I think, since it is National Archaeology Week, I thought it would be important to just share how I've been doing my work. And yeah, you can sort of see how that has influenced my career. So the outline for today's talk is fairly simple. So I want to talk a bit about some of the challenges in the mining industry, cultural heritage management space, talk about some potential solutions, think about the idea of a relationship reset between traditional owners and mining companies, and then introduce the ARC Training Center for Archaeology in the resources sector. And I will say before I begin that, this center isn't going to solve all of the problems that are out there. Nevertheless, we need to be able to start somewhere, and hopefully this will do it. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about archaeology in Australia's mining industry. This is a very potted history, just really, really quick. You could write a thesis about this if you wanted to, and I'm sure there probably have been some. But we do know that there's been a very long history of mineral extraction across the continent. You look at gold, copper, iron ore, and then getting into critical minerals as well today. So there's a huge amount of mineral extraction activity going on. But in the 1960s and 1970s, there was this boom in exploration and really public awareness of Indigenous cultural heritage, and how those two sort of meet together. Mining's mostly happening in these remote areas. We see some legislative change in some instances. So the Aboriginal Heritage Act was introduced in 1972. And sadly, that's the act that's still in place in Western Australia. It tried to be replaced, but it was repealed a couple of years ago, I think. But in the 1980s and 1990s, that this idea of cultural heritage management was really sort of emerging. You've got more archaeologists operating into this professional archaeological practice. Before that time, most people in archaeology ended up working at universities as academics, also into museums or other sort of spaces like that. But this was an area where people could, yeah, operate outside that academic world. And a lot of it was around compliance, lots around regulatory requirements for really sort of, yeah, if there's going to be any development, well, what sort of mitigation strategies need to be put in there. But this whole world of cultural heritage management really was amplified. Cultural heritage management firms are found across the country. They're the main employers of archaeologists. And then, you've got the resources boom happening in the Pilbara from I think it was the early 2000s, where everything just went crazy with iron ore. And yeah, there's a lot of obviously surveys that had to happen. And the role of archaeologists, the role of consulting archaeologists in this process is absolutely huge and incredibly significant. Consulting archaeologists are responsible for identifying and evaluating the significance of sites, low significance, medium significance, high significance. They do desktop assessments, they do archaeological surveys across massive tracts of country, lots of consultation and engagement with proponents, with traditional owners. And they also do a lot of salvage activities such as excavations, artifact collections, and things like that. So consultants have a huge role to play working for proponents like mining companies, but also for traditional owners. So what I'm trying to say here is that there is a really close link between archaeologists in Australia who are heavily linked to the mining industry in some way, shape, or form. So that is a very important role. On the flip side of that, how do mining companies or other developers see cultural heritage management? Something that is problematic, perhaps, or something that it might be a nuisance for them to have to go through and to be able to, to be able to get a project up and going. It costs people and companies a lot of money. And so the situation when we were coming up with this idea of the training center is we were looking at the fact that Australia has huge mineral wealth. We know that 10 to 13% of the GDP of Australia is from the mining industry, over $350 billion. And we also know that the government has really been pushing their critical mineral strategy. So you've probably seen in the media over the last couple of years, the government basically saying, come and invest in Australia because we have so much in the way of critical minerals. And so with this, there becomes sector growth, an investment emphasis, but then there's also a collision that I'll talk about in a moment. So on the flip side of that, you've got a 65,000-year archaeological record, 3,200 generations, a vibrant living culture, widespread across the continent. A lot of archaeological research has happened over the years to show this incredible significance of these places and features and the knowledge that Aboriginal people still hold about these places. So with this, you've got this inevitable intersection between traditional owners who want to care for cultural heritage sites and mining companies. So there's this tension that exists around cultural heritage management. You've probably seen in the media as well, public disagreements and costly delays to projects. I put a couple of examples up here. So around a coal mine in New South Wales, so damage to cultural heritage sites. On the other side of that, you've got mining companies saying that the cost for surveys and for paying cultural heritage consultants and traditional owners has skyrocketed. And so there's lots of tension, lots of anxiety around this space. And yeah, it is quite a challenge, especially when there's going to be damage or impacts to irreplaceable cultural heritage. So what does this mean, basically? So what are the implications of what we're seeing here? We're seeing that there are a lot of competing demands and pressures that are happening. We can see that relationships are deteriorating between traditional owners and mining companies. And the more growth there is in the critical mineral space, the expansion of mines, this is going to continue for the foreseeable future. We know that mining's not going to be going anywhere in the country, so we need to be able to find ways to engage with it. And so the question that we're asking is, is transformation required as part of this relationship? And I'm sure many of you are probably aware of what happened with Juukan Gorge in PKKP country in the Pilbara in 2020. And this is when Rio Tinto dynamited a 47,000-year-old site. And I think what's really important about this, I'm sure people have probably read about this and are familiar with it. It's about the consequences of cultural heritage mismanagement. So when you mismanage a cultural heritage site like this, there are significant impacts for not just for the traditional owners, but also for the mining companies. There's reputational, social, and economic damage. The CEO of Rio Tinto lost his job, board members did as well. If anybody's interested, there's a really great article out in The Conversation. It was published in 2020. It was by Hopkins and Deanna Kemp. And it was talking a lot about, the dysfunction, the corporate world of Rio Tinto and how this actually unfolded from that side. On the one hand, there was production pressures for Rio Tinto. They had their distinctive Pilbara blend, and they really needed this high grade iron ore that was at in the areas surrounding Juukan Gorge. But as when you delve deeper into the chains of command, where does Indigenous relations, cultural heritage, and archaeology sit? Well, they were sort of buried, they were siloed within a corporate relations portfolio. And so there was a breakdown in communication with how that knowledge about Juukan Gorge was and its archaeological significance and how that was communicated up the line. And what Hopkins and Kemp discovered was that the archaeological significance didn't reach the executive committee, the high up decision makers, until about 3 days before the event. And by then it was too late to actually to remove the charges. So when you've got this mismanagement, there can be quite serious impacts to both the mining companies and to traditional owners. So I do encourage you to just to have a read of that article that they put together. And they've also done a lot of really interesting analyses around Juukan Gorge but also about the responses from traditional owners from the PKKP about this. So the situation then is this is the question that we're trying to address is how can the mining industry change the way it engages with archaeology and cultural heritage management to improve outcomes for all stakeholders? We realize that is a massive question. We can't change everything overnight, but what we can do is we can contribute a step change, perhaps. We can work together, work in a collaborative way that I'll talk about in a moment, but we need to be able to do something. We know that we're in this era of amplified and politicized mineral extraction. Can we change the status quo? Can we change the way that things are done? What can we do differently? One of the other things, where can we go to get support to help transform the way the mining industry engages with cultural heritage management? Some people have said legislative change. As I said before, yes, in Western Australia, it was tried and it was reverted back. So we know how that ended up. And obviously, legislative change is huge, but it does take time and debate and other things. So other questions are what new training is needed for archaeologists to meet this challenge of this increasing tension and anxiety around the increasing growth of the sector. Another one is how can archaeology have more influence in the mining industry to better protect these cultural heritage sites? So it's about the influence. The decision makers in a mining company, they're mostly from engineering backgrounds, geology backgrounds, chemistry backgrounds. What do they know about archaeology? So we decided to look for funding. We went to the Australian Research Council. This is the peak funding body of the federal government. And working at a university means that I can access a lot of their funding schemes. And one of them was called the Australian Research Council Linkage Program. It's an industrial transformation training centre. So the government have made it very clear that they want universities, especially the humanities and social sciences, to engage more with industry, to be able to come up with solutions that are important to industry. So their funding is to support and train a new generation of highly skilled people in industries important to the Australian economy and its social well-being. They also had a government priority, which was value add to the resources sector, which we found very interesting. And so this is a very much an industry-driven research scheme. It's not pure basic research where I sit and do research on my own. This is something that has to be heavily embedded with a partner organization. Now, these schemes in the past have all pretty much been dominated by the physical sciences, the hard sciences. You can see some of the examples here. Only one of them has been in the social and cultural space, and that was the ARC Training Center for Healing Country that involved a lot of environmental work, and that's out of Curtin University. So the humanities and social sciences have been really sort of overlooked in this space. So we thought, here's an opportunity for us to do something a bit different. And so yeah, it was a gamble, and I think it worked. We got the money, we got the funding, which was pretty cool. So my colleagues and I, that the chief investigators, we've had a lot of long-term conversations, several decades worth, about what needs to or what can be changed in this space. What the other question is, what can research contribute to change as well? So we brought together collaborators to think about this idea. Now, who are the key players in this space about cultural heritage management, traditional owners, mining industry? Well, we need to bring in archaeologists, anthropologists. We need cultural heritage management people, so consulting firms, especially those that are working in mining settings. Traditional owners who have been impacted and are currently being impacted by a lot of development, some high profile mining companies with the resources to be able to support what we're doing, and social performance specialists. Now, social performance is something that really sort of emerged from Juukan Gorge. So when Rio Tinto decided to restructure things, they made community and stakeholder engagement, including cultural heritage management, a priority. And this social performance portfolio is something that's been increasingly popular since then as a space where this engagement can happen. So with those sort of partners, we thrashed out these ideas and came up with it. So we decided, the best way to do this, let's bring together some universities that have expertise in this space. Obviously, I work at Flinders University. We have an archaeology and heritage management program in the master's. We have a thriving archaeology program with a lot of PhD students. We also partnered with the University of Queensland's Sustainable Minerals Institute, in particular, its Centre for Social Responsibility in Mining. And this is with Professor Deanna Kemp, who has spent a long, long time with her team working on responsible mining in the mining industry for several decades. And they've done some really incredible work. And it's been great to be able to partner with them because archaeology has tended to be left out of that conversation. And by working together with them, we feel like we can actually do something a bit different. Southern Cross University also brings in a lot of strengths when it comes to things like geochemical analyses and the really sort of heavy science sort of stuff, which is well beyond me, but they are very, very good at it. And so we also had to bring in partner organizations that would work with us. So we're working with the PKKP Corporation, the Palku Jadia Corporation, and the Yandrawanda Yawaraka traditional landowners. We're also working with Rio Tinto, BHP, South 32, MMG, and Oz IMM, which is the accreditor for miners. And also working with cultural heritage consulting firms, Terra Rosa, Australian Heritage Services, and Niche Environment and Heritage. And also we've got Newmont that came on quite recently. So a question that I was asked a while ago, is this culture washing? Is it just mining companies coming up and dumping their money and running? Well, the answer to that is no. We've told the mining companies, you've made your publicly stated commitments to change. Each mining company has a partner investigator, and that role means that they're going to be involved in helping to tell archaeologists, tell a future generation, what do they think they need to know? As somebody that works in the university space, we can only have students for so long to be able to train them to be archaeologists, but it's always great to be able to have industry people come in and speak to our cohort to try and explain what they need in the private sector. So what we decided, let's have these conversations. What are the things? What are the objectives of this center? What needs to change? What needs to happen? One of the things is about transforming capabilities. So we know that traditional archaeological training involves pedestrian surveys, being able to walk in a line, identify artifacts, plot them, map them, draw them. Um, and there's also a lot of digital technology tools to basically that can be used to improve survey outcomes in a cost-effective way. So we need to be able to harness that capability. But it's also about interdisciplinarity. Like I mentioned before, we need archaeologists to build skills for interacting with mine managers, corporate and commercial systems, communicating the complexity of traditional owner knowledge. So we're not just archaeologists where we set up an excavation pit or we do a survey, but can we actually add another element to our toolkit, being able to influence a mine manager, perhaps, or understand how archaeology fits within a corporate system, a mining company. We also need to be able to grow our capacity. We know that the cultural heritage management industry is booming. There's recruitment pressures. We're not producing enough archaeologists to fill the demand that's out there. Maybe that's a good reason to go out and get more high school students to want to study archaeology, which would be great. But this capacity issue means that there's little scope for upskilling for those staff to be able to go and learn about these new techniques that are out there. We know that there's this growth in critical and strategic minerals. It means there's just more pressure to get this deep disciplinary expertise in the sector to be able to help convince a mining company of the archaeological significance. One of the big things as well is that there's a significant lack of accredited traditional owners working in the industry as professional archaeologists. For those of us who have been out on archaeological surveys, especially in places in the Pilbara, traditional owners have been doing these surveys day in, day out for many, many years and are outstanding archaeologists, but cannot get accreditation for that. And universities have a lot to blame for that as well. Traditional owners are often employed as cultural monitors, but the reality is they are outstanding archaeologists, and we need to be able to find ways to be able to get recognition of prior learning included, and so people can become accredited. We know that Aboriginal corporations are looking for skilled archaeologists to work for them to help communicate the complexity of archaeological significance. And yeah, this overall shortage of archaeologists working within the mining industry for mining companies is quite a small number of people. And it limits that understanding of cultural heritage management. So again, think of the executives that I mentioned before that have their degrees in geology and engineering and chemistry and all those things that are the nuts and bolts of the industry. And then the other thing is we need to be able to build better connections. So we know that archaeology, from the Rio Tinto example, archaeology is often nested in these portfolios, siloed away in the mining industry where its influence is diminished. We write the reports and they go into the company, and is that the end of the road for that report about a particular site? So we need people with skills to negotiate, to understand mining, and to influence those decision makers. Understand the inner workings of the mining industry. Well, why is it that the case that archaeological knowledge and Indigenous perspectives are disconnected from the core business of mining? And one of the interesting things that we're doing with this training center is that we're able to work with people, partner investigators that are in those executive spaces, people that can help us understand what is going on and how archaeology can be made to have an influence in decision making. And that's going to be really important for us going forward. So in terms of improving capability, capacity, and connections, what do? We need to train a new generation of archaeologists in partnership with industry experts. What does industry need? What do they want archaeologists to know? What do the traditional owners want archaeologists to know, and cultural heritage consultants as well? So what we've done is we've constructed a series of projects, of research projects that I'll explain in a moment. And these are designed for PhD students. So they have finished their undergraduate studies and they've got 3.5 years to be able to do an in-depth dedicated project into a specific sort of area. So for me, my PhD project was based on on rock art from the Torres Strait Islands to try and understand how designs were shared across space. And postdoctoral researchers are those that have finished their PhDs and are embarking on a full-time research career as a professional archaeologist. And so another thing that we're doing is that there's a lot of knowledge sharing among partner organizations. We're all working together as a group. The information that we generate is shared amongst people, especially around best practice frameworks and things like that. And then also the traditional owner accreditation as professional archaeologists. So some of the things that we're doing. So these projects emerged out of long-term conversations with our partner organizations, the things that they think that they need to be able to improve their practice. And so the first one is around technological adaptation and implementation. So one of the things that was continuously brought up is that we need some better survey methodologies to deliver improved archaeological survey assessments. Now, we know that some consulting firms and other companies are already doing this, but in this sort of space, we want to be able to amplify that and be able to get more of that technology out there. So things like drone technology and AI and machine learning to detect archaeological sites. LiDAR is to predict site locations and reconstruct landscapes. Some other things around geophysical surveys for subsurface archaeological sites. And so, when you're going out and doing a survey where you're walking in a straight line, you can see what's on the surface, but what about what's beneath the surface? Oftentimes, when you're doing your survey, it's only after the reports are made and the process of digging places up happens, and then you can actually find what's underneath the surface, and that's when delays happen as well. So, is there a way that we can actually see what's underground, so ground penetrating radar and things like that? So, how can we take that technology that we have and put it into practice with partner organizations? The next one is best practice frameworks. So we know that there's a lot of different features within the life cycle of a mine that need attention. So we want to be able to establish these overarching and holistic best practice frameworks for the resources sector. These things that are adaptable to different environments, different settings. And some of the things that we're trying to do, mine closure, for instance, I was reading somewhere, there's about 200 mines that are set for closure by 2040. So the question is for us is what's the best practice framework for dealing with the archaeology and the cultural heritage of those sites that are being closed down? If you go through the Pilbara, for instance, there are shipping containers all through the country where artifacts have been picked up and salvaged and put into those places. But what happens when a mine site is ready to close down? What happens to those artifacts? So trying to identify best practice framework for mine closure is something that's really important for traditional owners and for the companies as well. Other things like drilling, blasting, and impact. So if you've got a rock art site, a rock shelter site where drilling and blasting is happening, what's an appropriate buffer zone so things don't get damaged? And so we're going to be working with archaeological scientists to try and identify the best buffer zones to protect those places. Other things like dust damage. I remember there was one site that I went to in 2011 for the first time in the Pilbara. And it was this extraordinary rock art site, some of the most extraordinary stuff I've ever seen. And there's a railway line, maybe about 200 or 300 meters away, maybe less. And I went there again a few years ago, and it was no longer two railway lines, but it was up to about 8 or 10, and there was haulage roads everywhere. There was dust flying around everywhere. So this site was it's hemmed in, it's surrounded by all of this industrial activity. And so what's the damage that's happening? What's the impact that's happening to that particular site over time? And is it a way can we actually quantify it? There's other things about data management and all the information that's collected about places and how is that information stored? What about gendered knowledge? How is an intergenerational knowledge? All of these things are important to be able to create a best practice framework. One of the other areas is around organizational dynamics. So this is where we conduct research into the organizational systems where cultural heritage management exists within the resources sector. How is archaeological knowledge used or not used in the mine life cycle? How does archaeological knowledge influence investment decisions? What about archaeology and risk management? Where does archaeology fit into the risk management portfolio of a mining company, for instance? Where do Indigenous rights feature in archaeology, mining, and social performance? And what needs to change? And this is where the Center for Social Responsibility really, really shines. They're going to be absolutely critical for this sort of thing. This is one of the things that they really are dynamite at. One of the other things is around knowledge systems and two-way learning. So we're interested in things like data sovereignty. Like I said, mining has been going on for decades, and there's been a lot of reports that have been written about a lot of places, interviews with a lot of people over time. Where is that information? There must be hundreds and hundreds of reports about that are about traditional owner intellectual property. And so we're going to try and do some research into this and try and establish the best practice framework around that. Um, yeah, and also, what are some of the factors that influence best practice training for traditional owners as cultural heritage specialists? So we're going to do some global research into understanding the best possible ways to create programs with traditional owners to have them to get people accredited through recognition of prior learning. And this is the other crucial training angle that we have. It's the co-design and delivery of this training program. So Professor Ian Moffat at Flinders is going to be leading this area and is getting that accreditation to formally recognize cultural knowledge about heritage. And this is being run through Flinders University through its graduate program in archaeology and cultural heritage management, and creating a bespoke, custom designed project or a custom designed pathway for traditional owners to become accredited. Some of the other things that we're doing that we think are going to be important for training this next generation, it's student placements. So one of the big things that archaeologists need to be able to do is to do a placement, to do internships with industry. Because we have such a diverse group of partners from mining companies, traditional owners, and consultants, we're going to be placing our students and our postdocs with those companies for a maximum of 12 months over the next 5 years. And so they'll be able to get exposure to the way that operations happen within those companies and to get a better idea of what they need to know. There's going to be opportunities for an annual symposium where we share our research. One of these really interesting things, though, that we're doing is through AusIMM. And so AusIMM are responsible for the accreditation of professional miners. They do a lot of professional development courses. And one of the great things that they've asked us to do as a partner is to be able to come in and create specialized training modules for people in the mining industry, so mine managers and things like that, to explain about what archaeological significance is, what traditional owner knowledge sort of looks like, what cultural heritage management is, and how important it is to consider through the life cycle of a mine, how it features within risk. How does it operate in risk management? There is an economic concern when it comes to archaeology, so it needs to be taken quite seriously. So we're really quite fortunate to be able to put into a position where we can contribute in that space. There's a lot of workshops, a lot of seminars and things like that we're going to be doing, but there's also a lot of key events. So thinking of this compensation for cultural loss, what sort of role can archaeology play in this? We've seen some big decisions come down over the last couple of months. The Timber Creek case, there was the MacArthur River Mine case with the Yanyuwa and Gudanji people, and then just last week or the week before with the Yindjibarni and Fortescue. So is there a role for archaeology to play in this? I'm not sure. And this is something that we can really sort of start to explore over the next 5 years. But there's also lots of links that we can make with other allied areas, such as the Mabo Centre at the University of Melbourne. But what I'm trying to say here is that there's a lot of scope, a lot of opportunity for us to be able to contribute to dealing with this challenge. We know it's not going to be easy. We know that there's going to be roadblocks or pitfalls along the way, but we looked at it as an opportunity from the federal government to be able to get funding from them. Our training center is worth $18 million. So it means that people have put in funding because they believe in it, which is pretty exciting. And yeah, so I think that's all I've got.
Thanks, Liam. It's been really wonderful to listen to your presentation. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us. It'll be great to see how the project begins. I think you mentioned formally in June and then continues, and we look forward to more presentations and articles in journals, and likewise seeing how it all transpires from here. So thank you very much. And
Thank you,
for
Caroline.
those, thank you. And for those watching as well, there will be a recording, I think. We'll just have to confirm afterwards there should be a recording that will be up on the Australian Archaeology website. And just to wrap up quickly, this webinar today, Liam's webinar, is obviously part of a broader program of events that we have for this National Archaeology Week. So we encourage everybody to head to the National Archaeology Week website and check out what's happening. There are events all across the states and territories. They're online, they're in person. There are workshops, there are digs and all sorts of things that you can get involved in, from children all the way through to adults. And there are a couple of other webinars as well, one focusing on teaching and learning in archaeology, simulated excavation, and another one focusing on historical archaeology. So I'd encourage everybody to have a look and get involved, and check out our Meet the Archaeologists part of our website. Thanks, Liam, for giving us an overview of the work that you do as well. But we will close the webinar now, and thank you everybody who's joined us online for your time. Thank you, Liam, and also thank you Fenella Atkinson, who's been in the background helping us run this webinar.